Hello and welcome to a very special episode of Beatson Talks. I'm Gillian, Hailstones, CEO of Beatson Cancer Charity, and today Laura Boyd has very kindly let me sit in her chair for this episode. I'm joined today by Dr Punam Krishan, GP, broadcaster, author and health campaigner. Punam, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
We were just having a wee chat there before we started about that question and what that means. And
I did the typical thing of, good, thank you.
Absolutely. So obviously, you've been very open and honest about the journey that you've been on, going from being a healthcare professional, the giver of advice, the person who supports others when they are going through challenging times, to finding yourself on the other side of that conversation. And that must have been a very, very challenging transition to have to make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's one of those conversations that I've been a doctor for 20 years, many, many times have unfortunately been the bearer of bad news, or I've had to hold the hands with patients who have gone through this journey, but nothing prepares you to hear the words for yourself. And I think in that moment, like literally the world as you know it just crumbles and you find yourself just very vulnerable, very scared, and no amount of knowledge. I think a lot of people think, well, surely as a doctor, but nothing prepares you for that.
No.
Because the word cancer is very loaded. It's full of lots of uncertainty. You don't know what the next step looks like. And no matter who you are, it hits you, and no amount of knowledge in the world can prepare you for it.
Absolutely not. And I think in some ways that knowledge can be a challenge and a double-edged sword, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
Because when you get that diagnosis and you're starting to try to work through the emotions of it, because you have that logical brain, you have that professional knowledge.
Yeah.
It must be a challenge to switch from doctor brain to yourself and your own feelings, and potentially make it difficult for you to connect to those feelings and that emotional processing that goes with it, because you're so caught up in the technical knowledge that you have and those questions that you would ask and those thought processes you would go through. Were you the GP supporting somebody?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting because I thought I knew everything about breast cancer. I mean, you never know everything, but I felt like I knew a reasonable amount. I've been talking about breast cancer with patients, had some loved ones affected with it. But what I realized was that sitting in that chair with my consultant, and as he was talking, all these like receptors and medication pathways, and suddenly I realized I don't know anything in the detail. Like, I'm not a specialist in breast cancer. As a GP, you kind of, you overlook a lot of it. You get letters through. You're following protocols that have been set by experts in those fields. And I realized actually I don't know as much as I thought I did. And I wasn't able to be objective in any way whatsoever. And so I feel like a lot of the time, I felt really stupid at times because I was asking really stupid questions. And I remember my consultant going, there is no stupid questions. You know that, Punam. And I was like, but I feel like I should know this, but I don't. Can you explain this again? And I don't quite understand, because you are so consumed. You are the human that's experiencing all of this, and it's your future. And people are talking about statistics and your mortality and your 5-year plan. And it's just so jumbled that you cannot make sense of it. Fortunately for me, my husband's a doctor and my sister is a doctor, and both of them were with me at every appointment, and they were doing the listening. And we always say, bring someone with you, because whoever that person, they don't need to be medical, but whoever the other people are that are with you can listen, because your mind will fill in blanks because you're only listening to certain words. Your brain is geared to hear all the scary words. Your nervous system is so on high alert. And they were able to kind of take in the facts, and later on I'd be like, well, what was he saying? What did that mean? And they were like, well, no, that's not how you've understood it like this, but that's not what he said. So I think that, I decided very early on that I was going to just surrender and trust what was being said to me. My breast cancer nurse, my absolute hero in life. Like, I couldn't have done any of this without her. She was on speed dial, and I remember the very first day she gave me a card and it had her details on it. And she was like, right, so, there's a lot of information we've given you today. You'll probably have a lot of questions. So here's my card. And I remember just binning it. I was like, I don't need that. I won't need that. Literally, my husband had taken a photo of it. She was on speed dial. Like every other day, I was like, I don't understand this. Or I've got another silly question. And I just realized it was about trusting them. They knew what they were talking about, parking whatever medical knowledge I had, and also appreciating that every single person that goes into that clinic will have a different pathway. I think that was the biggest learning point. You could have 1,000 women with breast cancer in the room and everyone would have a different medical pathway. And therefore you cannot compare and you cannot think, well, why is this happening to me and not to that person? So yeah, a lot of it actually was the steepest learning curve. I feel like it's made me a far, I don't want to say better, but a doctor that understands cancer in a way that I just didn't beforehand. So I guess there are some silver linings to this.
I mean, I think it's incredibly strong of you to be able to look at something so challenging for you personally, for your family, for your loved ones, and look to find a positive out of it or a learning out of it. And I'm sure that will make a big difference, but I think it probably speaks to the doctor you were before your cancer experience as well. I mean, what you're talking about there is something that a lot of our listeners will absolutely relate to, and we are so fortunate. The clinical teams that we've got supporting us across Glasgow and West of Scotland are just phenomenal at what they do. Did it bring a different element to all of this, the fact that you have a public profile as well, because this is such personal news and it's such a personal thing to go through. You've said that yourself, it's so individual and it had an impact on you as a person and the family and the people that you love. Yeah. When you have that public profile, it takes a different, well, I would imagine it would take a different element or bring a different element to your experience, because you have to manage the news of it, who you share it with, and how you look after yourself when you're going through your treatment.
100%. I think for me, the most important thing was my children. So, and I always choke up when I talk about my kids, but I think that when we got the news, all I could think about was them. How do I protect them? And I think having a public profile, I didn't want anyone to write the story for me. I didn't want my kids to find out that way. And I didn't know the future. I didn't know what the future held. And I didn't want that fear or anxiety to be put onto them without us having the facts. And so literally as we walked out, I was like, I don't want to tell anyone about this. And apart from my husband, my mum, my sister that was there, and a couple of really close friends, I was like, I just need to know where we're at. And protecting them was everything. It was the most important thing for me. And so therefore that became the beginning of I'm going to just deal with this in private. And I've always used my platforms in a very open and honest way. I feel like all of us at some point are going to have a turn at we'll have the ups, but we'll also have the downs. And I think when it comes to health, being able to share openly experiences really does help people. But in this case, I just didn't know what I was navigating. This felt so much bigger than me. So we kept it to ourselves. And it was when I knew what was going to happen next and what the prognosis looked like that we decided to tell our children. But even then I was like, until I'm not out the other side of what the other side might look like, I just didn't. And the thing is, I think the public profile, a lot of the time you can absorb the energies that come from that. And I just didn't want that. I wanted to just be seen as Punam. And therefore, actually, lots of, even like my own friends, a lot of the school mums, they were so shocked the day that I actually shared it. And this was after my active treatment had finished. A lot of them were like, but we've been seeing you all the time. And actually what happened in keeping it really private was that I was allowed to have pockets of normality. So school gates, we all just laughed at the normal stuff. Yeah. When I met my friends, we were just talking about normal things. It kept life going. And I can't fall apart when my mum, I've still got to get up and do everything for my kids. And so just getting lost in the ordinary and then having those moments to crumble when I did with my safe people was really helpful. And I think that protecting the energy was key. And I think when you have a public profile, it's a very fine balance of how you do that.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It must be. And now that you've come through what you were talking about as your active treatment phase, it's really brave of you to be sharing that as well, because it is so personal, and to put your story out and to share that so openly and honestly with people does take it into a different space for you now, you and your family. Yeah,
it really does. And I really did think carefully about the point, never want to ever share anything, because this isn't just my story. Cancer affects so many people. It might not be you, it might be someone that you love, and breast cancer is very common. And especially as a doctor, a lot of my job is to raise awareness, and it's about, public health. And I choose to share sort of elements of my story because I feel that sometimes it just helps knowing that you're not alone. Mm-hmm. I was searching for that when I was going through my treatment. Mm-hmm. I was looking for, women like me, mums like me, how are they navigating it? And so I think now talking about it, it's hard because I think I'm still, I know I'm still healing. I'm still recovering. I'm still trying to make sense of what's happened over the last 8 months. Mm-hmm. But there's a comfort sometimes that comes from, well, actually, I am using this in the hope that it helps somebody else. But in return, I'm also meeting people who've walked the path, or maybe they're slightly ahead of me, and they spark and hope for me. And so I think it's been hard. I think just being able to share it, I found the hardest part of the whole thing. I genuinely thought that as soon as treatment finished, that would be it. That I'd be back to being Punam again. I think that what I learned many months on is that actually this bit still feels like the hardest bit. Mm-hmm. And it in a very clinical way, it makes sense. My body is still healing from all the treatments and things that it's gone through, the trauma. The nervous system is still very much learning to feel safe again, learning to trust my body again. But the whole process changes you. I haven't still got to how it's changed me, but I think that several months on, I do feel that every day there's a point where I go, I don't know who I am anymore. That bit's really hard to explain to anyone, but I know that when I do speak to others that have gone through it, they go, that's very normal. Yeah. And that's so validating.
I mean, I'm smiling when you're talking here because that's something that we hear so often with the people that we're fortunate enough to be able to support when they're working their way through what you're talking about here. And I think, just to say a huge thank you for sharing this so honestly, because it's a really important conversation. There's a huge risk that when active treatment ends, people are led to believe that then that's it, they're better, and everything should just go back to normal. They can start living their lives. They're okay, they're cancer free, they're moving on with life, job done. Yeah. And it's absolutely not like that, as you've said. It's almost the start of your recovery when you finish that.
I feel like that's the day one of it. And I think that because healing is so layered, and I think we've all been guilty of it. I look back at my career and I think that there's been probably times where I've gone, well, that's amazing. The results were all clear. Woo, and absolutely, when you're sitting there and they tell you that's you got it clear, that's the end of your treatment, your last treatment, you walk out and there's an elation that comes with that. You're like, whoa, it's amazing. But very quickly there's a switch that goes, but what if it comes back? Am I really okay? What if they miss something? And I feel that there's this inner, we have this inner critical voice that lives with us, most of us throughout our lives. But then there's this other new voice that comes up that constantly just micro-analyzes everything around you, and you're like having an amazing time. Like, I was recently on holiday, I'm having a great time with my children, I'm watching them, because cancer, for the one, again, talk about silver linings, it's really brought into sharp focus of what life is all about. Mm-hmm. It's really changed my perspective. And I hear that a lot from other patients that have gone through that journey. So you're sitting there, you're like, oh my God, this is so wonderful. And then suddenly this voice goes, but what if it comes, and suddenly it's just these intrusive thoughts that you just don't know where they come from. And you're like, go away. Mm-hmm. And the fear, I think, living alongside that. And we often talk about grief, I think there's a lot of me that grieves old Punam. The Punam that was carefree, if I go back to even August last year, 2025, just a carefree version of me. And at the time, I probably thought I was the most stressed person, juggling life and everything. But I wasn't waking up scared in the way that sometimes fear consumes me. And I hear from others that over time, this gets better. But I've also learned that you can be grieving and you can be really sad and you can be really scared, but you're also able to be so grateful, be so thankful, be so happy and content and blessed. And I feel like I'm constantly between those. And sometimes you're just, I'm so exhausted. It is exhausting feeling all those big emotions. And I'm still learning. Like, I journal and I write and hoping to make some kind of sense, and maybe one day it will all make sense, and it is still quite fresh, but it's hard is all I'd say. And definitely when I was going through all my active treatment, obviously every day was just full of anxiety and worry and fear, but you knew what the next step was. Today we're going to get up, we've got the appointment, we're going to do this, and you're busy. Yeah,
you've got structure, you're carried through by who you have to be.
And you've got an end point, but there's no end point or timeline to healing and recovery, and you never go back to the you that you were again. But it takes a long time to find who you are, because up until that point, like, I'd spent, 42 years finding who I was. And I was like, this is me. And then I'm like, boy, we're learning to walk again. And it's in a world where everyone else is the same. Everyone thinks of you in exactly the same way that they did, but something has changed and you don't know what that is. That's where I'm at. Does any of that make sense?
Oh, you've put it beautifully, and it does. It makes a lot of sense. I think it's that betwixt and between almost. And, you talked about when you were in active treatment, everything felt prescribed and organised and planned. And then almost when that ends, every decision suddenly feels like a big decision. Yeah. Things that you would not have thought about before twice, they would have almost been automatic. Yeah. Suddenly feels like you're having to consciously decide.
Everything. And it's exhausting.
That was the word that was in my head when I was listening to you talk, and then you said it's exhausting.
Yeah, should I eat this? What should I eat? Have I moved my body today? A lot of it is just, it's a lot. And I think for anyone else that's listening to this, I think if they feel this level of exhaustion, it's because it's real. Mm-hmm. And I'm really sort of immersed at the moment in understanding what recovery and healing looks like. Because of course, like the doctor within me, it's like, what this is, why was I never taught the anatomy of resting and recovery and healing, and what does that actually look like? Because we're so used to going, oh, well, you've had a surgery, this is how it's going to heal. This is the timeline, 6 to 8 weeks, rest. But actually, how do you recover from something that has been so life-changing, so traumatic, so many layers deep, not just physically, but also emotionally and mentally, and in a deep sense, spiritually? Like, you've gone through so much, and all of those systems are trying to heal at the same time, whilst you're still navigating a world that is very busy, it's loud, it's 24/7, and the expectations are still there. You're still a parent, a sibling, a friend, somebody who has to show up at work. It's a lot to put on one human being, and I get that. And so trying to find self-love and self-compassion in those moments and not beat yourself up. I'm learning to do that, because sometimes come on, Punam, what are you doing? And I have to go, no, take a step back. Like, as my boss last week was like, she's like, it's only been 6 months. And I was like, gosh, it has. And that's why I feel just a bit, not burnt out, but just a bit scunnered by it all.
But I'm listening to you talk, and it's the difference between being tired and being properly fatigued.
Yeah.
Do you know? And there's fatigue takes on a whole new meaning as a word and a concept when you put it against the backdrop of what you're talking about. You're tired, you have a lazy weekend, you sleep late, you feel better. When you're fatigued and it's day in and day out and every single day feels like wading through mud, how do you recover from that? Because it's not going to be one weekend of lying on the couch. It's not going to be a late lie-in in the morning or an early night that's going to take you beyond that. Yeah. And it also helps you to realise that you never really had any sense of pacing in your life. Yes. Because whenever you think life got busy, you just upped a gear and kept going. Yeah. And when you don't have that in the tank, you don't have any more gears left, then it's a real challenge.
And I think learning to walk that path again in a world that, as I said, still is going at speed, learning to find pace is quite a challenge. But it's something like I know people still say to me, oh, you seem very busy. And I'm like, but what you see is maybe it's that public persona. You may see social media. Remember, social media for everyone, it's a highlight reel. You're just seeing little moments of that person's day. You're not seeing the moments where I am absolutely just depleted on the sofa, or I'm sleeping for hours on end, or I'm crying in the shower, just don't know why, but it's just come on and I'm just having a massive wobble. Or, it takes lots of shapes and forms, but in the background, it's not easy, it's messy. And there's no book that tells you how you're going to heal because everyone's circumstances are different. And I think that that's all the parts of cancer that we don't speak about enough, so that when you actually come out of the other side, you're searching. And that's why I choose to talk about it, because I'm searching for people that go, God, that makes sense. Yeah. I went through that. I don't want to talk about, I didn't feel talking about the active treatment part was going to be of much help to me or to someone else. But actually, I'm curious, how do people find their rhythm again? And how do they find pace again?
I don't think you can underestimate the power of you having this conversation, because there will be people listening to this podcast who think, oh my goodness, it's not just me. Oh my goodness, I'm not feeling, I'm not coping. This is actually what life after your cancer treatment looks and feels like. Yeah. And it's okay for me to 6 months down the line, a year down the line, still not know how I'm meant to get through this or what this is going to look like for me. A lot of these, you mentioned the book there, a lot of these themes are themes that you have picked up in your book. While it's not a book particularly about cancer, it's a book about motherhood, it's a book about being a woman, it's a book about roles and responsibilities and the challenges that come along to challenge our expectations and our ideas about ourselves fulfilling those roles. Yeah. And it's a book that's come out at a time when you've been going through all of this as well. So
yeah, the second half of the book was written after I was diagnosed, and this book, The Mother Load, was something that I have been thinking about since the day my son was born. He's 13 this year, and I didn't have an easy time with my birth back then. I had a very traumatic birth experience. It landed me in intensive care, multi-organ failure, sepsis. I had really severe postnatal depression. So I've had my fair experiences of being a patient on the other side of the consultation table. But I remember at that point just being like, well, why wasn't I warned that this was also a possibility? Because birth trauma is not something that's often spoken about. And certainly at medical school, we weren't taught about that. And also when it comes to motherhood, we're given books on pregnancy, we're told about the birth, and then everything becomes about the baby. And I think just during my recovery of that time, and then just thinking at every stage, oh, it's going to get easier, it'll get better. But then just learning that actually every mum I spoke to and the mother within me, things don't just finish at your 6-week postnatal check. There's fundamental changes. And again, I guess there's a parallel with cancer in that there's a huge identity shift that comes with any major life event. And becoming a mother is a huge point in your timeline, and it changes you physically, biologically, emotionally. And I really wanted to write something because there wasn't anything available for mums through all the stages of motherhood and the challenges that we face and the intensity of life and the pace that brings, but also what's happening to the female body. So everything from pregnancy through to perimenopause and beyond, all the challenges that we go through, whether it's looking after aging parents, showing up in the workspace, but also having kids of different age groups. And then, of course, second half, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was like, another layer that gets added to the load. How do you mother through illness?
Mm-hmm.
How do you still show up? Because things don't stop. You don't have the luxury of just falling apart when you've got kids, young kids to look after. And so the book honours all of that. And yeah, as I said, from pregnancy all the way to the end of time, motherhood changes our bodies. So yeah.
And do you feel that influenced either your style of writing or how you felt about the book, being able to bring in that different perspective that hadn't been part of the concept when you started it?
I think it's just, it's very raw. The book is it's as human can get, because I've got the lived experience as well as just being somebody who's held the hands of lots of mums going through that journey. So I think when I say I poured my heart and soul into it, I truly did. And it also became the thing because I wasn't able to work during all my surgery and treatment, etc. It became everything that I was able to go, right, well, what can I put into here that's really going to be a practical guide for somebody or hold somebody's hand that's going through a challenging moment. So yeah, it's got every blood, sweat and tear in it.
And you mentioned yourself that whole concept of being at the school gate and mum pals being those moments of light relief. That must have been a really strange juxtaposition for you to be at home writing that book, considering these concepts and these ideas and themes, then being at the school gates and having that chat and almost in real life and in real time making that compare and contrast.
I feel like I was living two lives. I've never been somebody who's been able to compartmentalize ever. Like I look at my husband, I'm like, I don't know how you can just put things in boxes in your mind because everything's all over the place in my head. But during that time, I was able to I'd drop the kids off and they were like my why and everything. And they keep you busy. They keep you, just like you're just busy with them and distracted. And then they would go off to school. Then it was kind of almost a daily routine. Then I'd come home, I'd cry in the car, I'd cry in the shower. I would just take the dog out for a walk. But then I'd be like, okay, right. And I would absolutely be able to just submerge myself in this because that was a different why. Why was I doing that? And then I'd get to school and to try and do that gear change is where all my friends or the mums that were just moaning about this or that. And I loved that because that's what we do. Or the school gossip or whatever. And you would just be able to step back into, right, we're distracted and we're getting on with just life again. So I was kind of living these two lives at the same time, I guess, when I've never really thought about it like that. But it worked. I think that what you've got to do, and everyone's different. So as I said, there's no book that tells you how to do this next bit, but you've just got to take the next step. And that will look different for every person. You just got to do you, whatever makes you distracted, keeps you busy, keeps you smiling, but also the spaces where you just need to retreat and cry your heart out, and you've just got to do what you need to do to get through.
And that's the most beautiful description of coping I've ever heard. Because we talk about coping, I feel like I'm not coping, or I want to be able to cope with this, or I'm worried I can't cope with this. But actually what you've described there beautifully is what coping looks like. It looks like crying in the shower because that's what you need to do in that moment. Yeah. It looks like having a laugh about, something that your husband leaving his socks somewhere, or a moan about, the kids expecting you to pick them up and drop them off everywhere, because that's everyday life. And being able to just
playlists. I've got gospel playlists. I've got sad playlists. I've got happy playlists. Just, and you do. We're all human. I don't know anyone that could go through anything like that and say, oh no, I wasn't weepy, or no, I was absolutely fine through that. None of us are. I just wasn't. And there's loads of days now where I think back and And I just cry. I think crying is such an incredible therapy. Well, I love crying because I feel like afterwards I'm like, that was good to get that out. Some people find it in talking. And I obviously wasn't talking to a lot of people at that time. And I found that actually, like my dog listened to a lot.
Knows everything.
And I cried to him a lot. I think he was like, oh my God, why is my mum crying all the time? But yeah, you just got to get on with it.
Now, you've shared so much and you've shared it so honestly, and you spoke recently at our ladies' lunch, and I know that every single one of those 700 women in that room were moved by what you said and inspired by what you said. Is there anything else, before we come to an end today, that you might want to say as words of advice or guidance or encouragement to anybody out there?
Gosh, it's not easy.
No.
And no part of it's going to be easy. But you've just got to take the next step that's in front of you and don't lose hope. And I think that it's really hard to give out advice because I'm still in it. But all I would say is that I don't know if it ever completely goes away, but it's okay to just have days where you don't have all the answers and you don't know what's happening next. But maybe the silver lining is that it's bringing you right into the present moment. And I remember the very first couple of days I'd got the diagnosis, and I spoke to a friend who'd had breast cancer, and she said to me, there'll be gifts along the way. I remember getting off the phone and being really angry. There's no gifts. What gifts? Just like, how could she say that to me? Now looking back, I'm like, there's so many gifts. And I think sometimes just focusing on allow yourself to grieve, allow yourself to cry, allow yourself to feel all those feelings of anger and rage and why me and it's not fair. They're all so valid. But try and just reframe it and think about, well, what's the positives that come from that? And I know that I am a much more present person. I know that every single day I am living it to the fullest. I giggle from the belly with my kids. I am out there saying yes to things and adventures. And because it brings into sharp focus, this is it. This is our life. It's beautiful. There's lots to live for, lots to smile about. And the hard bits are going to be hard, but there's definitely lots of gifts along the way. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you. I think that's absolutely perfect to end. Thank you very much for coming on. Thank you so much for your honesty and your openness and for what you've shared. I know there'll be a lot of people listening who it will mean a lot to hear someone else speaking the same truth that they're feeling right now. So thank you. And thank you to everyone for listening to today's special episode. If you or someone you love is wishing to find out more information on what advice and support is available, please visit beatsoncancercharity.org. Whether it's emotional support, practical advice or information, we're here to help.